Hello everyone, it is Tyler Warwick here, and this is a very, very exciting week for Hunger Games fans because we are finally getting Sunrise on the Reaping, which is Haymitch's Games, the Hunger Games prequel. I have been waiting for this for years and years now, and I'm sure fellow Hunger Games fans will agree that we've always wanted to know about Haymitch's Games. We've always wanted to know exactly what went down. Throughout the books and throughout the movies, we get little glimpses, little clues as to what he went through, but we're finally getting the full story, and I am so excited. And I thought, what better time to reflect on my journey with the Hunger Games, because it has been wild. It has been kind of crazy. I think we moved on from the Hunger Games way too soon. I think that definitely when I was reading the books when I was a teenager, I was like, oh, I love this fantasy, exciting and thrilling, but that will never happen. And I think that the world has evolved to a stage where maybe things hit a little too close to home. So I totally get it. But I think that is great in itself as well, because we can use these stories to reflect on where we are. And maybe we can do something with that and learn from that. Anyway, as you know, I am hugely into nostalgia, and I want to go through my journey of the Hunger Games because it got kind of wild over the past couple of years, to a point where teenage Tyler would simply pass away, would not be able to handle what has happened. As someone who grew up in New Zealand and then Australia, I'm so interested to know what your guys' experience was, those of you in America and throughout Europe and across the whole world. I want to know about your experiences as well. Let's start at the very beginning. As most things in my life, I was introduced to the Hunger Games by my big sister Amber, who is the opposite completely when it comes to books. I am a terrible reader, and I have always been a terrible reader. Must be ADHD, because I really struggle to just stay engaged and to concentrate. I'm one of those people who I will read 2 pages and then I'll be like, I actually wasn't paying attention, and I have to go back and reread them again. And I don't know why it's taken me this long, but I finally discovered how amazing audiobooks are, and I'm like, I can go for runs, I can do anything around my house and listen to this book. They have really changed everything. However, Amber is like the complete opposite. She just told me the other day she read like 16 books in January. What? Like, my brain doesn't work like that. So it's a big deal for me to like actually read a book. I think this I figured this out, must have been about 2009. She went away with some friends from school, and her friend had a copy of the Hunger Games that she had got from America because it hadn't been printed in New Zealand yet, so we didn't even have it. And she was like, you got to read this book. And so of course Amber read it in like that weekend, like a day or 2, and she came back and she was like, I think you would really like this book. And I'm like, No, I was already doing my required reading at school at that stage. We were reading 1984, which I actually love and is like a very similar genre. But I was like, I'm not reading this if I don't have to. And I said, well, what is it about? And she said, these kids are chosen and they have to fight to the death in a games. And I was like, wait, that actually sounds amazing, because I grew up loving Saw, which when I think about it now is kind of insane. I think I first watched it when I was like 11 or 12, and I became really obsessed with them. And I actually do think they are very good stories. And my justification, I guess, to my parents, because they were like R18 movies, and I was like, no, it's fine that I watch them, because Saw to me is kind of just like a very intense version of a crime show, Criminal Minds or NCIS. You know, the whole point of it is they're trying to solve the case of who is the jigsaw killer. This whole concept of there being the games and there's rules to the games and you have to win the game was just always so fascinating to me. And so when Amber explained about the Hunger Games, I was like, wow, yes, that is right up my alley. Anyway, I started to read it, and I was immediately hooked. And I was thinking back on this. I think Part of the genius of Suzanne Collins when she wrote these books is that they're very, very well structured for a teenage audience. They're super fast-paced, super engaging, and almost every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. And I remember having to be like, okay, I'm just going to read one more chapter before bed. But then it always ends on like this huge cliffhanger, and I'd be like, okay, no. Next chapter. Or sometimes it would be fun because I would force myself not to read it and then lie awake for hours trying to guess what the next chapter was going to be. I really, really like in the books, and we'll talk about the movies later, but I really love in the books how everything is from Katniss's perspective and we are learning information as she does. So we don't have this kind of outside exposition of what is going on behind the scenes or what's happening. We are learning everything in real time. And for me, that made me feel much more like I was in the story, you know, almost standing next to Katniss, especially once she gets into the games, because she doesn't know what the game makers are thinking. She doesn't know that there's all of this stuff and drama going on in the background. She doesn't know that there are small acts or sometimes big acts of uprising. She doesn't know any of that. She doesn't know what effect she is having on Panem. And I really, really loved that. And I thought it made everything really surprising and really engaging. And when things happened, I was always really shocked. I should have said this at the beginning, but side note, this is going to be filled with Hunger Games spoilers. Not for Sunrise on the Reaping because I haven't read it yet, but for the first 3 books and a little bit of Songbirds and Snakes, I guess. But if you haven't read the Hunger Games books or seen the movies, probably come back when you have. With that said, all of the moments that happened in the book, especially the first one, I obviously guessed that Katniss was going to be in the games, but, you know, Prim getting her name called, and then I remember it was hugely shocking to me when you found out Peter had betrayed Katniss. For me, when I read the books, I really bought into it. I wasn't like, oh, he's just siding with the careers to like help her. As soon as it happened, I was like, oh, this is his game. He has spent the entire time lying to Katniss and to kind of manipulate her so that once he's in the game, he's just gonna get rid of her. Like, I really believed that. And then again, when you find out that actually he was doing it to save her and to help her, it was like another shock again. Everything was very, very surprising to me when I read that first book. I remember getting to the end of it and thinking, this is like the best book I've ever read. And probably, I mean, at that stage, really, all I had invested in was Harry Potter and Twilight, which are both series that I love dearly, especially you guys know how I feel about Twilight. But Hunger Games was much more intense, and as I was saying earlier, I just found it much easier to kind of get myself lost in this world of it. And then I read the second and third book almost immediately. And the same with Catching Fire. I haven't read it in a while. I need to go back and reread it. I've seen the movies many, many times at this stage, but I remember the way that they set up the book, or the way that I definitely felt at the time. I was like, okay, to get back at Katniss, they're definitely going to put Prim in the games, and they're going to put Gale's siblings in the games. And I need to remind myself, because it's been a while, but I think even maybe at the beginning of the book, there's kind of things that suggest that that is what's going to happen. I know that Katniss walks past the school and she's like, I wonder which one I'll be mentoring. But the whole concept of them, a world in which they go back into the games, was just non-existent. I was like, well, that didn't even cross my mind. I could never have anticipated that. So then when the Quarter Quell is read and you find out that it's going to be existing victors and Katniss is going back into the games because she's the only girl, I was shook beyond belief. Literally threw the book onto the ground. I do remember when I read it, we went on holiday at my grandparents' house in the far north of New Zealand. And I was just so shocked. I could have never, ever anticipated that to be the case. And then the same thing, everything that happened throughout that book was very shocking. And then Mockingjay, exactly the same. I don't know what I anticipated, how the book would end. And I know that I'm sure that there is still much discourse about how it ends, but I just thought it was the perfect ending because all throughout stories and life, I have this thing about the people who you deeply, deeply emotionally connect with and shared same experiences are the only people who are really, really going to understand you and be there for you throughout life, is how I personally feel. So I'm definitely going to make a whole nother video about Lost because I'm obsessed with Lost. But that's kind of the whole concept of that show. The way that it ended, which we can talk a lot about, is that it's the people who you experience these things with and you had the most meaningful connections with other people who you need within life and death to be fulfilled. And I really, really buy into that, and I really believe that. And I really, really love that the book ended with Katniss and Peter together with children, because it perfectly did that. And I mean, she says that in the book. Peter's like the only one who will ever truly understand, and Haymitch, like they're the only people who will really ever truly understand her, will be able to give her meaning in whatever the rest of her life is going to be. I obviously very much wanted this to be a movie, but I think that there was talk around the time, and maybe this was even intentional to build hype for it. There was definitely this talk that it would never be made into a film because it was way too violent. Like, how are you supposed to sell a movie franchise that is aimed at teenagers but is literally about kids killing each other? And some of the deaths described are very Saw-esque. And I remember I always thought, I was like, well, Saw is R18. And so how do you make the series while honoring it, but without making it R-rated? I wasn't sure how that was going to happen. But of course, they started to release that it was happening. I remember one of the first things I saw was that Josh Hutcherson was going to be cast as Peter. And for those of you who don't know, some Tyler lore that I actually re-dropped to like last week because it's been 18 years since the release, I had a very starring role in the Disney movie Bridge to Terabithia. I was like pretty much one of the main characters. No, if you have seen it, I was in 3 scenes for about 2 seconds. But it was an amazing experience, and it was filmed over like a month in New Zealand. And I got to spend a lot of time with Josh Hutcherson and Anna Sophia Robb. I just thought they were the coolest kids ever because they seemed so mature. They were American, obviously, and anyone from anywhere that's not America, I think, will relate to this. We grow up with everything being American, pretty much. This is especially in New Zealand. Well, this is in New Zealand and Australia from what I can relate to, but I'm sure this happens other places as well. It's like if we hear like a kid with an American accent, we're like, oh, they're famous, because it seems... So we just associate that with fame. So both of them had been working for many years. So Josh, I think he was 12, was already like, well, he had been a professional actor for a long time. So he was already like a working actor. And he was just so kind and mature. And one of the first days I was talking to him and I was like, oh, I really like Zathura. And then he was telling me all about it. And he's like, yeah, it's so cool. Like, being here in New Zealand filming, because we were like on an actual set, and I think Zathura was all like green screen, obviously, and it was all in like a sound studio. So he was like, we're here, and that, you know, it's so great to be filming outside. And then on his lunch breaks in the race scene, we would have actual races together. All of the kids would play games together. So I just have always felt in a weird way like I know him, because I did meet him and work with him for that short amount of time. But whenever, I followed his career and saw the more movies he did, and when he was cast as Peter, I was like, because I always read Peter as being like, well, I mean, I guess that's how he's described in the book. To me, Peter was much more a really big, broad, muscly guy who is... I always imagined that he looked like a bully who would beat you up, probably more closer to the actor who they cast as Kato, except even bigger than him. A high school jock, bully, I'm gonna like beat you up. But then he talks to you and you see how kind-natured he is. I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Also, Josh is like the same height as me, Short Kings. I thought that was interesting. I was like, I wonder how this will be. And then heard about Jennifer Lawrence because she had been nominated for the Oscar for Winter's Bone. Around that time, that was when I was getting super into serious acting. I was like studying Meryl Streep and Viola Davis and all of these amazing actors. And I was like, oh, Jennifer Lawrence, this girl was nominated. And when I heard it, I watched Winter's Bone. And okay, here's a bit of a controversial take. I actually think it's my favorite performance of hers. I really love her as an actress, but I think Winter's Bone is she's so subtle in that role. She's so real. Everything is very, very low key. She's just a gal, and I really, really love her performance in that. Yay! Like, I'm so glad Katniss has been cast as someone who is a really, really strong actor. I remember the trailer came out and I was like, oh my God, I have never ever, up until that point, actually, there's only one other thing that has done it for me now, which I'll tell you in a second. But the trailer came out and I just thought it was the most incredible trailer I had ever seen. The vibe of that trailer, what I saw in my head when I was reading the book on screen, I was so happy and I thought, wow, Jennifer looks amazing, how I thought she would be. And then after seeing that, I was like, yeah, Josh is going to nail this. This is really, really going to work. This was back in the peak Tumblr era. And anyone who was there around that time will know Tumblr went rabid for this Hunger Games movie. To the point where Lionsgate would release like the smallest little clip and people on Tumblr were like screenshotting like every single moment and analyzing it in depth. And I became very, very into this Tumblr analysis of the Hunger Games and what it was going to be and what we were going to get. And every time a new behind the scenes photo was dropped, or every time there was a new little TV clip, it was just insane. And I remember that was probably my first experience with really using social media in that way to connect with people all over the world who were just as obsessed with this thing as I was. So I hold those times very, very dearly. Then finally it got closer and closer and the film was going to be released. Just started drama school, and again, maybe I'm going to have to do a whole nother video about drama school, because while I am so grateful that I went to drama school, it was like hell in so many ways. Especially the first year is all about breaking so many things about not only your acting, but just your identity, to get rid of all of this bullshit and so that you can build up from something new. And I was going through it at that time. I think it was only the second month in, but I was really going through it. And this Hunger Games movie was kind of like a really good escape for me, because I was trying to deal with this highly emotional self-identity crisis. And then I would be like, but Hunger Games is coming out, so yay. And I remember I went to the midnight screening of it, and that was also an incredible experience because, so many people were just so hyped up for this movie. And this is a very, very recurring thing with me. This has happened throughout my whole life, and I don't know why I'm shocked every time that it happens, because it still happens to this day. The first time I see a movie or a musical or something that I've so highly anticipated, I just can't process it the first time I see it. I'm always, because there's just so much expectation that I watch it and I go, every time that something isn't how I thought it would be, or every time something is like different, I'm like, especially if it's like a pre-existing thing, like obviously Hunger Games books, or the big one, if you listen to my video from a few months ago, was Wicked. I felt the same way. Obviously, I knew Wicked inside and out, loved the musical so much. So the first time I watched it, it was like the same experience I had. Definitely not disappointed, but just like, what, like my brain can't process that it's not what I thought it would be. And I remember watching that first Hunger Games movie, loved the performances, loved the world of it. I think the disappointment is a strong word, but I think the thing that I was missing was, as I said earlier, the books are from Katniss's perspective. You don't see anything else going on. Whereas the shift of the movie was that they got rid of that first person perspective and you got to see what was happening all the time. During the games, you got to see the game makers talking, you got to see the uprisers happening, you got to see Haymitch influencing the game makers to kind of drive this love story narrative. So you saw all these things, and definitely now I understand how that works much better for film. But I think I just really, really loved in the books how it was so surprising. And even though I knew everything that was going to happen, I felt much less surprised about when things happened in the movie. Definitely not to shit on Josh Hutcherson's performance, because I think he's amazing and I think he did a really good job. But I think the way that whole thing was directed, about how once they're in the games, Peter is with the careers, I don't think anyone would believe that he was actually doing it. There's no moment of being like, oh my God, he completely betrayed her, because every time you see him with the careers, he's always like looking like this. And I know when they're running after, there's the part where they're running after her when she's in the water. They're all like, yeah, let's go get her. And then Peter's running behind like, So there are moments like that where on film just don't translate the same way as they do in the book. Anyway, I saw it and I thought, yeah, no, this was good. I liked it. Did I? And then I think 2 days later I went and saw it again, and I had that same experience of like, oh, okay, no, this is really good. And then doing the thing that I have to do in my brain of putting aside the novels. The novels are one thing, the movie's another thing, and I think it was a very strong adaptation. And something that I really like about that first movie is that it does feel very sort of artistic in a lot of ways. I like the ways that filming techniques and cinematography that they use in that first film are very not typical of like a really big budget action film. There's a lot of sort of handheld moments. There's a lot of lingering on Jennifer Lawrence, on Katniss's face, which I really, really love when they do that in cinema. And I really, really liked it. I like the very beginning of that movie still gives me so many chills. I really, really love how they open with the treaty. I love how they open on Seneca being interviewed about the games immediately to Prim screaming in her room. Pretty quickly after that, they started talking about catching fire. I don't know if they would have been able to advertise that movie without showing that they're going back in the games. I mean, that happens like less than halfway through, I guess. So what, are you just going to keep... Like, they had to show that there were games happening, I guess. But again, it kind of took me back to this thing. And I mean, that's why I am so grateful that the books came out before the movies were made, so I had no spoilers at the time. But it was like everyone knew that they were going to go back into the games, you know, which was was the biggest factor of maybe even the whole trilogy for me of those books. It was the biggest surprise. And so to know that that was already like out in the open for the movies, I was kind of like, well, I guess they had to. The next year came around, And was it released? No, they started getting released in November, and then it was November each year, I think. I have to check on that. But I remember when Catching Fire was going to come out, obviously midnight screening again. There had also been a whole year on Tumblr as well about theories on what was going to happen in this movie, how it was going to be different from the books. It wasn't quite the same hype that there had been around that first movie, but I was definitely part of that discussion again. What I really loved about the second film is that I think it is probably one of the closest adaptations from a book to a movie that I've ever seen. I will say it has been a little while since I read it, but it was just so close. I always have this thing, whenever they adapt books to movies, there are definitely things that they have to leave out, or there are things that maybe just don't translate as well. But I think I always get frustrated. I always get really, really frustrated when changes are made that I personally feel like weren't really thought through enough for the other movies. And the biggest thing that got me, I'm remembering now, this was just like from the back of my brain, something about the first movie that really pissed me off. I really didn't like how, so in the books, everyone gets to bring a token from their district into the games. And it's this huge plot point because, is it Clove? Wait, does it? I can't remember if it happens. Oh, I need to reread the books. I can't remember if it happens for this game or if it was a previous game that someone tried to bring in a ring that was actually laced with poison so it could be used as a weapon, so it was confiscated. And obviously Katniss brings the Mockingjay pin that was given to her by the mayor's daughter, who was kind of like her only friend. And, you know, I wish they had included that carrot Madge in the books, in the movies, but I do understand why they couldn't. Regardless of how she got the pin, it was a huge thing that she was wearing the pin in the games, and that's how she became the symbol of the Mockingjay. That's how everyone knew that she was the Mockingjay, because this girl from District 12 who had beaten all odds to win the Hunger Games and do it in a sort of rebellious way wore this pin on her. But then in the movie, it's like this big thing that Cinna like sneaks it in and he like puts it behind her jacket so it's hidden. And I was just like, but what does this mean for the rest of the movies? How is she going to become the Mockingjay? Literally, the third movie is called Mockingjay. It's like such a huge plot point. I mean, I guess at the end during the ceremony, she's wearing it. And then Snow is like, what a lovely pin. And she's like, thank you. It's from my district. I guess that's how they justify it. But I don't know. That was like one thing that annoyed me. And now I've made such a tangent that I've kind of forgotten where I was at. Catching Fire, the differences. Oh, yes. The reason I love Catching Fire is I don't really think that anything was wildly changed at all. It was just basically like they had taken the book and put it onto screen, which I think is a real testament to Francis Lawrence, who directed the second film and then has directed everyone since. The kind of the understanding, like these books are so beloved and people are so obsessed with it that don't fix what ain't broken, you know? The books are written in such a way that I don't think you really need to change that much. So anyway, I was very, very happy that that was happening. I thought it was really well done. I really loved the second film. Obviously, you guys know this has become such a big thing for me and such a big thing kind of in pop culture. That moment where Katniss enters the arena gives me chills every single time. The ratio change they did in the cinema from it going widescreen to full screen, it was just done so well. And yeah, I love it. Love it. Second film is very, very good. Then, of course, everyone who was there around this time knew about the whole Part 1, Part 2 movies. And it was just, look, I'm going to say a very controversial opinion to my fellow millennials, but I don't think that part 1, part 2 ever worked. And I'll be so interested to hear your guys' opinion on this. But I don't know if any of those stories, and when I say this, I'm referring to Harry Potter, Twilight, and Hunger Games. Yes, we always want more. There's always things that could be fleshed out more. And I think as a fan, I am really glad that we got Harry Potter Part 1, Part 2. I'm glad that we got Twilight Part 1 and Part 2 because you get to experience more and see more. But I don't know if it was necessary. Like, it did, obviously around the time there was all this thing of like, it's just a cash grab from the studios. But personally, it's hard for me to watch Deathly Hallows Part 1 as like a complete story. I do really appreciate how with Twilight, I will say with Breaking Dawn Part 1, it does kind of end at the perfect point. Like, it does feel, in my opinion, you could watch all of that movie. That could actually be the ending. Bella, because the whole story is about like Bella becoming a vampire. She becomes a vampire and then it ends. I can kind of justify, like, you could not watch part 2 and it kind of still makes sense, I guess. All that to say, I was like, do we really need Mockingjay to be in 2 parts? And again, as a fan, I was excited to have 2 more movies. But now, all these years later, I have actually heard Francis Lawrence be like, he has said, I never wanted that to happen. I never wanted it to be 2 parts. It was never my decision. The studio had already decided that. And again, I went to the midnight screening of part 1. I've never not enjoyed one of those first viewings. Like I said, it's too hard for me to shut off my brain and not question these choices. There were moments that I loved in that movie. I really, really think the moment of Peter coming back and attacking Katniss, I think is done much better than how I read it in the book. Like, in the book, I guess I just read it as, I think she like runs towards him and is like, Peter, like goes to hug him, and then the hug turns into like this. But the way that it's done in the movie is just so good. I love that moment. But it just felt like such an incomplete story. It was kind of like, we're just waiting for part 2. A year later, final midnight screening, saw part 2, and I was a mess. I was such a mess when it ended, and there were so many things that I loved about it. Being one of these people who was just so obsessed with the books, there were things, I feel like Prim's death was a bit like brushed over when I first saw it, because I know in the book, the whole point of these stories, the whole basis of them is that Katniss's biggest motivator is to save her sister. And then her sister dies, which I think is I'm so interested in these stories where the protagonist's main reason for existing gets taken away. And then it's like, well, now what do you live for? And how do you keep on? How do you continue life? Those stories really, really get to me, because that's how I feel about my own humanity, my own life. It's like when people get what they live for taken away, how do you live on? How do you build yourself up? How do you make a new life for yourself after the only life you've ever known to like protect my sister is gone? That's super, super interesting to me. I feel like they didn't give it enough kind of oomph in the movie when I first saw it. Very, very overwhelming when that came out. Also, as I said, they came out at a very, very wild time in my life. I was very, very going through self-identity crisis. My whole sense of self was changing daily. So it was wild. Over the next few years, I rewatched the movies many, many times, and as always, picked up on new things. And this is what I love so much about movies, especially because, as I said, I'm not a huge reader. But what I love about movies is that there are so many movies throughout my life that I've just watched over and over again. And as I've changed as a person and felt differently about the world, so has my view on that movie. So obviously me watching The Hunger Games when it came out in 2012, I would have looked at it very, very differently to how I look at it now in 2025. So that was crazy. All of this to say, all of my friends always knew how much I loved the Hunger Games. My family, everyone around me always... I have a slightly obsessive personality, definitely. I mean, look at this Wicked stuff behind me right now. These things like Wicked and Hunger Games have always been very linked to me. Like when people think of me, when they think of those things. These stories always meant so much to me. A few years went by, and in 2020 was when I started really doing social media and started recreating my favorite films and TV shows. And out of the many things, Hunger Games was something that was doing really well for me. And it was kind of reigniting this story that I have been so passionate about, and this crazy social media journey that I've been on is that cast members started to see the videos, and I was asked to be in this documentary for the London Film Festival a few years ago, talking about kind of the rise and fall of the teen dystopian genre. The fandom and the hours that I've poured into this thing that's personally starts to be relevant again for my career and for what I'm doing, which is insane. I think probably the most viral Hunger Games one I did was I was on vacation in Orlando, and we had a pool. So I did the scene where Katniss enters the arena, which I said before I love so much. And I'm sure many of you know this. I only ever recreate scenes that I'm deeply passionate about. I will never ever recreate a movie scene that I don't like. I mean, there are plenty of movies that I don't like, but why would I remake those scenes? Because I'm not passionate about it. That scene had such a huge impact on me. I was like, definitely have to recreate it. When was this? Is this 2022? I made a Hunger Games fan fiction series where it started off, as many of these series do, as what would it be like if I were in the Hunger Games, like fan fiction sort of thing. And people really loved it, so I kept doing it. And then I started incorporating H2O into it, and it kind of became like a fan fiction mashup of H2O and Hunger Games. And Frozen was thrown in there as well, these musical references. And again, that had all stemmed from because I had read so many fan fictions before where they just randomly use like song quotes, or they randomly make a reference to like, also Elsa was there. I don't know, merging these stories together. And so that got really popular. And then it was announced that they were going to be making The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the Hunger Games prequel. They were going to be making that into a movie. I have to look back at the timeline, but I think between the book coming out and it being made into a movie, or announced that it was going to be made into a movie, was pretty quick, maybe like a year. I had started reading the book and I thought it was really interesting. I don't know what happened. I just got way too overwhelmed with everything. This was also like during COVID. I never ended up finishing the book. It was announced that it was going to be made into a movie. I was like, oh my gosh, yes, we're back. We're back. The Hunger Games is back. I love that it was going to be directed by Francis Lawrence again. Viola Davis is one of my favorite. I think she's like one of the best actors of our time. I love her in everything. And it was announced that she was going to be in it. I had seen West Side Story with Rachel Zegler, and I was like, that makes sense that she's going to be Lucy Gray. So I was super excited to be like back in this Hunger Games, back in this era. What happened, for those of you who don't know, in 2023, SAG went on strike. There was a SAG strike. This had a huge impact on the industry, obviously, because everything stopped being filmed. And it had this very interesting effect on social media influencers, because people like myself had primarily been doing content based on movies and TV shows, was kind of like the bread and butter of our social media. And then we were basically forbidden to be producing content that promoted these IPs. And it was very... again, a whole nother episode we can talk about this, but it was very interesting for me because I am someone who has been professionally acting since I was 5 years old, and to get into SAG as a foreigner is quite a complex process. It's not like you just say, okay, I'm going to join SAG. Like, it's quite a complex process, and obviously it's an ambition and goal that I've had for most of my life. And then we were all being told that you cannot, if you are a social media influencer who one day wants to be an actor, you cannot be making content about this new IP. And then it turned into this weird thing of like, okay, well, can I make a video about the Hunger Games? Because the Hunger Games came out like over 10 years ago. Or does that break this rule because there's a new Hunger Games coming out? And by me talking about the old Hunger Games, it could be seen as advertising the new Hunger Games, which I'm not allowed to do. And so it was just very, very complex. And then it was announced that they would be releasing the Hunger Games, but it was very, very like, don't talk about it if you're a social media influencer who wants to be an actor, which again is such weird terminology because so many of us like already are actors or have been professionally acting most of our lives and are now also on social media. I obviously was disappointed because I was like, oh, this Hunger Games movie is coming out. I totally understand what SAG is fighting for, and I think in the long term, actors need this, and I think that actors have been taken advantage of for far too long, and so I agree with that, as well as being disappointed that I can't talk about and enjoy this new Hunger Games film that's coming out. All that to say, I still don't really understand this, and I don't know if anyone else does as well. Hunger Games was granted what they call like a SAG waiver, which meant that suddenly Hunger Games was exempt from the SAG strike. So suddenly it was like overnight, it was all back, all over social media. Hunger Games coming out. Like, all of the actors were told that they were allowed to advertise their movie. And so it was like a very wild switch. I got asked to attend the Hollywood premiere by Lionsgate, and I was just like, this is actually insane. Can you imagine telling Tyler in 2012, who had so eagerly awaited to go to my local cinema in New Zealand to see the midnight screening of the Hunger Games, like, tell him now that he's going to be walking the red carpet with Viola Davis, Rachel Zegler at the Chinese Theatre in Hollywood. Like, it was so insane to me, and I was so insanely grateful. I was originally going to be hosting on the carpet as well, but what happened, which I totally understand, and this is how it worked, this is how business and Hollywood works, is even though Hunger Games was exempt from the SAG strike, they still didn't know how many people would actually still attend. You know, usually the hosts on the red carpet are like, that's their job. It's like professional e-news people and professional journalists. But because they weren't sure if they would be doing it, I guess they were going to ask social media people to do it. As it got close to the time, they were like, oh, I got this email basically saying, we're really sorry, but we're going to use the person who's like the main movie host in Hollywood. And I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense to me. I got to attend the premiere, and it was just so incredible. I got to walk the red carpet. It was my first red carpet, actually. See a lot of fans, got to do all this cool stuff. And then we went inside and we sat down to watch the movie, and the actors kind of file in and stand at the side because they're about to go down and they're going to do like an interview with the host. It was not me, thank God. At that stage, I was like, oh my God. I was sitting with my friend Sam, and we're watching this like professional journalist who knows every single detail, knows hundreds of people's names like that. And we're like, can you imagine if that was me? Like, obviously they hadn't anticipated this event to be what it was. And so it was the smart decision to go with the professional. But anyway, they're filing in, and I looked across from me and I saw Rachel Zegler, who I love. She looks over at me and she goes, and she starts pointing and she's like waving at me. And I was like, me? Like, what? And she was like, oh no, Cleo. And Rachel, that moment will be in my head for the rest of my life because it was just so incredible. And she was standing with Tom Blythe, who plays Snow. It was just such an incredible moment for me. I knew that Rachel had seen like some of my things before, but I didn't know she knew like my H2O stuff. I thought she had maybe just seen like a Hunger Games thing I had done. So that was just such a cool experience. Before the movie started, I got up to pee and I walked straight past Viola Davis and I was like, I am not worthy. This is an actress who I have just been so inspired by and love so much. So it was just incredible. Anyway, watch the movie, and I love that movie. I thought it did an incredible job at establishing the world. They kept using this word of future retro. We knew it was set in the past, but we know it's set in the future. And I like this idea that it's kind of the way that I imagined it in my brain. It's like the apocalypse happened and then they had to build everything up again. So you have styles are going to change, things from the past are kind of going to be missing. I like the whole thing about how the drones, how they were like shit, like they didn't really work. And I thought that was really cool because for me, that was a symbol of this technology from the past not just easily translating to this new future. So many styles are cyclic, so it makes sense that the world would be back in this kind of stage of like the retro looking TV screens and microphones, and I thought that was really, really well done. And then I got to attend the after party, which was insane. When I first walked in, I saw Tom, who played Snow, and I had a really, really great conversation with him. He was so nice. I got to meet a lot of the tributes, who are all so nice. I got to meet some of the producers of the Hunger Games and had conversations with them, which was insane. And then Rachel arrived. She said how much she loved my videos, and I was like, how incredible it was that her journey that continues to go on now, and she's just so incredible. I really, really love her and respect her. And yeah, it was an amazing night, and it was just so wild for me, this deeply sentimental, nostalgic person that I am. But it was very, very crazy to have reflected back on that kid sitting in his bedroom on a Saturday night, breaking apart this Hunger Games trailer on the other side of the world, training to be an actor, wanting to be an actor, all these years later, being in Hollywood, walking the red carpet. Yes, I wasn't in the movie, but I was with peers, I was in that situation because I had been recognized for my acting and my videos that I produce on social media. And then I was walking the red carpet with the actors from the movie. It was insane. And I'm so, so grateful. Now, as I said, we are at the next stage. Sunrise on the Reaping was just released last night. I have not begun reading it. Look, guys, I will tell you, I'm going to listen to the audiobook, which I'm going to start tonight. And then we are getting the film as well. So who knows what's going to happen with that. I'm manifesting some good things for that. And that is where I'm currently at with the Hunger Games. I had this goal at the beginning of the year that I really, really wanted to try producing more videos like this. I love hearing about other people's experiences. I love sharing this part of my life with you guys. I have so much joy out of the content that I make. I am so, so grateful to everyone who supports me with my film remakes. But to be able to do this kind of content as well and connect with you guys on kind of a more personal level is just something that I think is so exciting. So I'm going to continue doing it. I am posting this as a podcast as well. You can find Tyler Warwick Podcast on all podcast streaming services. And let me know what else you would like to hear about. Let me know what other movies, TV shows, musicals you would like to hear me talk about. And as I said, please comment on your experience with the Hunger Games. Were you around in that Tumblr era? Did you come to the Hunger Games later? Did you read the books before the movies? Did you see the movies before you read the books? I would really like to know. I love you guys so much. Thank you for supporting me, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.